Hello, and welcome to the LifeWorks podcast. Joining me today is Bob Pearson, an expert in the areas of communication, marketing, social and digital media, as well as current and future trends in all of those areas. He's the author of 4 books, including his latest, Crafting Persuasion. He currently serves as Senior Technology Advisor to the State Department's Global Engagement Center, whose mission is to help the federal government recognize, understand, expose, and counter foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts aimed at undermining or influencing the policies, security, or stability of the United States and its allies. Bob, it is an honor to have you on the podcast today.
Mark, I always enjoy speaking with you, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. The reason why I wanted to have you on today, Bob, is we live in the most connected time in our history with mobile devices, search, mainstream and alternative media, social media, streaming and gaming. People's access to information, content, and news is unprecedented. In addition, the barrier to entry to creating and published content is also perhaps the lowest it's ever been. However, it's become increasingly difficult for regular folks to be able to distinguish trustworthy information from misinformation or disinformation. So what I'm hoping you can do is to help me and our audience to understand what misinformation and disinformation is, how to identify it, techniques for thinking critically, and where to find good and reliable information. Like I mentioned in the intro, you have an incredible professional background, and I feel that no introduction that I can give can really do you justice. Tell me a little bit more about your backstory.
Yeah, so, and by the way, when I talk about disinformation, I have to put in the caveat, Mark, that these are my own views as a citizen, not representing any one entity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course. I have to do that. Yeah, I grew up as a communicator. So I early on became responsible for global international communication departments in the pharmaceutical industry and then the technology industry. And really what that taught me is how do human beings behave? How do content news cycles occur? How does information move across 10, 20, 30 countries? And so you're not only doing that and trying to promote things, but you're also looking at issues and understanding how issues emerge. So what I didn't realize at the time is I was learning a lot about human behavior. Wow. And then when you look at technology and when we started to get social media and the ability to build algorithms, we started to be able to put the two together and say, okay, we have a pretty good gut feel of how humans work. Now we can actually build algorithms and actually see exactly how they really do work. Oh. And so you can see who's influencing who, how they get influenced, what's the elasticity of content, how it moves along. And those are extremely valuable skills for all of us, not only to protect our country or communities or companies, but also how to understand how bad actors work. Because really they do the same thing we do, they just do them in a way that we don't like. Right?
Right.
So we have to be as smart as they are or smarter so we can outmaneuver them. Yeah. So that's a little bit of my background. And I think, yes, I have a lot of jobs and things I've done, but it comes down to understanding human behavior, understanding how communication works, and then going from there.
Wow, that's fascinating. At a very foundational level, what's the difference between misinformation and disinformation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think people confuse the two. And let's start with disinformation. Disinformation is a tool to use no different than cyber warfare, or you could even argue, those who want to instigate problems around the world. If you look at Russia uses disinformation like asymmetric warfare. They are really looking at how to desensitize entire populations around the world over time, so we don't know what's right and what's wrong. That's one of their ways of building power. If we look at China is much more methodical. They're more like a big consumer packaged goods company. They know exactly what they're doing to tell the world, this is our version of the truth. We believe that's disinformation in many cases, not always, but in many cases. But they're very clear about it. That's different than misinformation, where people are just quite frankly, that could be a bias that people have.
Yeah.
It could be way too opinionated. It could be a group that just hates another group and is just throwing stuff out. It could be people throwing out mini hoaxes. They're looking to misinform, very dangerous. But disinformation I see as something that is really methodical and consistent and has a purpose, where misinformation is more episodic often.
Can you give us some examples of misinformation and disinformation that you've seen?
Yeah, sure. So again, start with disinfo. I mean, when you look at COVID-19 and when it first started, at the end of March, the Kremlin had already put out over 110 disinformation campaigns. And really their attitude is like, they just throw stuff out through third parties, Wow. Bill Gates created, the problem, or this really occurred in a U.S. laboratory, and they know the majority of people in the world will know that that's BS, but they know there's a certain number of people that go, maybe there is something here. So it's the volume of information that they push out. So it's not a disinformation campaign. It is a campaign to disinform. It's a very different thing. That's one versus hundreds, right? So misinformation, it runs the gamut. I mean, you have, again, this could be those who want to create mischief. This happened in Texas, where there was a person who was setting off bombs a couple years ago. And immediately people rode the wave, those who wanted to misinform, and said that this was a racist activity. Yeah. So of course, without any other information, people assume that. You don't really know the answer until months later, but people are interjecting stuff in there to misinform, hoping that people will go in a different direction. And that's easy to see. The question is, do we put in place the right mechanisms to just, tell people what's really going on?
For someone like Russia or China, maybe more specifically, what's their long-term goal in putting out these disinformation campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important when you look at other parties to not just go negative, but to think positive too. Like you always want to think like them and then go back. So China's goal is they want to be number one in the world in everything. So on its face, what's wrong with that? Every country has the right to decide that they want to become number one in something. Right. It's how they go about doing it. And so, so if you think of go back to COVID, a very simple example, I don't think anyone would say, gee, they've been really upfront and transparent about what happened in Wuhan. I mean, no one's saying that, right? So I think the way I would look at it is, if you want to be the best in the world, there's an obligation to also be transparent and honest and open. And those things go together, at least our view of the world.
Right.
They don't have that view of the world. And so it's okay for them to disinform and to tell a narrative that we know is not true, but they believe is part of getting to the right place, which is leadership in the world. That's totally different. Like I was saying, like with Russia doesn't aspire to be number one in the world. Russia just aspires to have power and to keep everyone on base. And they there's lots of examples there.
What kind of tactics do they use? Like, how do bad actors spread information, and who are they targeting?
Yeah, so you go back to election interference, and we, I think, woke up here in the U.S. and said, oh my goodness, the election might have been interfered with. Well, what we need to get better at doing is understanding patterns before that stuff like that happens. Because if you looked at Russia trying to interfere with elections, you could find maybe 20 plus examples in different countries where they were experimenting for years before they came and used some of those similar tactics in the United States. So really, this is where I look at the media and say, we need more journalists, or we need more curious journalists. Because if you actually look back enough, you'd say, oh, this is pretty obvious what they were doing in Europe, in Eurasia, in the Middle East, in the Balkans, right. And now they're just using the same techniques against us. So it's very rare that bad actors do something that's that innovative that we haven't seen it before.
Right.
It's a matter of us looking backwards and understanding their patterns. The other thing is they use proxy networks really well. So if you think on the positive side, Amazon.com uses proxy networks. We just call them affiliates.
Right. Right.
And they want all these people out there talking about their products to drive people into Amazon so they can actually sell more on Amazon. It works really well. Well, if you're Russia, you want all these people to actually be basically selling your content by moving it and actually pushing people towards a certain direction. So it's basically an affiliate program. And we,
Wow.
and I think that's important. Like if you look at like, what's happening commercially that's innovative, and you look at what bad actors are doing that's innovative, there's often, they're pretty darn close.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard you talk about a 1-9-90 model for influence. I want to pull a thread on what you just said about that, but I want to bring in a talk that you've given in the past related to that. For our audience, can you tell us a little bit about what the 1-9-90 model is?
Yeah. Well, if you go back to what I was saying about studying human behavior, one of the things we've seen in the media anywhere in the world where you have enough media is that less than 1% of people are prolific content creators, and you can see exactly who they are. That 9% of us like to share content to inform our communities. We want to inform, we want to educate, we want to solve problems. And then 90% of us lurk and learn. We don't do anything. We passively consume search content, social media content, and we're cool with that. So the 1% are easy to see because they're very prolific. They could be journalists, bloggers, they could be anyone. Yeah. The 90% is over here. The 9% we forget about. And that's what proxy networks haven't forgotten about. Because they're like, okay, if I can identify the people who are most likely to move my content, a lot of them will move it for free because they don't like the people that we're going against. Others, maybe we give them a little bit of money and then they move it, right? On the positive side, if we actually do the same thing, we have a lot more good people in the world than there are bad actors. So if we actually get better at using these techniques to put content out with the right keywords, we can actually bury the negative information coming from Russia and other places like that. So, but that takes teamwork across not only the public sector, but also the private sector.
Tell us a little bit about the disinformation landscape today.
Yeah. So in that, I like looking at things that are as quantitative as possible. And so I actually now go out of disinformation and go into counterfeiting and illegal drugs.
Oh, wow.
So the counterfeiting industry, by the way, they use the same techniques, same tools, same platforms, sometimes even the same people, right? Wow. Because you make money and you fund other causes where you can't make money. The counterfeiting industry worldwide is about $500 billion, and that's like a conservative estimate. And then the illegal drug trade, we know it's very easy to move drugs online. So when you do that, we've actually just studied that recently. It's not hard at all to bring illegal drugs into the US. It's not hard to bring counterfeit in here. And what you see is that people they're using message platforms well, they're using the dark web well, they're using ghost accounts on Instagram, they're seeding content in the infrastructure. So the kind of thing that they do is, if you look at how they work, like I would say in a message platform, hey Mark, go to Instagram account X. And you would go there and you'd see a phone number, but like no posts. It's a ghost account. You hit that number, you're now in another message platform, and we're saying, okay, here's what we need you to do. Oh, and then you go public and you start doing it. So we have to be better at understanding what people do when they go into encrypted places, and or we have to get better at scraping the dark web, and then looking at the behavior of people when they go public, right? Because if we're just looking at people going public, we're missing a lot of how bad actors work. So that you can learn from the drug industry and the counterfeit industry. And that bad actors do the same thing when they're trying to disinform us.
It really seems that disinformation is extraordinarily pervasive. Is there disinformation in the mainstream media?
It could be misinformation, but it's certainly biased. I think, and Mark, you and I have talked about this before, where the personalization of news matters so much. So this is the thing that it doesn't bother me. It is what it is. Right. When I ask university students where they get their news, it's social media. I don't have anyone raise their hand and say they're reading 2 newspapers a day. I haven't run into them, and so what you then say is like, okay, but who are they trusting? And so I think that the journalists have an obligation to get out of their comfortable areas and actually get on social media and engage with people directly
Yeah.
And I think we'll have much better dialogues and people will respect them more.
Mm-hmm.
So, I believe that the future of the newsroom, a lot of that potential is outside the newsroom. And when you look worldwide and you say, where do most people get their content? It's through two companies. It's through Facebook and Google.
How do we identify reliable information?
It's a lot of people trying to do that. And, whether it's fact checking, which has not proven to be very successful.
Yeah.
There's blockchain exercises, nothing there that's that successful so far. I would say, there's people putting up alternative content, so you can have a choice. I don't think most of that works well. And there's a reason for it is, you've talked with Victoria Romero before,
mm-hmm.
and who's a psychological expert, and you think of availability bias. So what's happening is, people get locked into usually not more than 4 channels a day,
Mm-hmm.
being apps or mainstream media outlets. And they're just consuming from the same place. So they start to believe whatever they're hearing in that stream is true. So if we're going to now tell them that this fact is wrong, or here's an alternative source, their instinct is, that can't be true. It's not, oh, good, someone's informing me, I can get educated. So we have to get that kind of out of our head. Right. And what people need is, who do they trust that could actually speak to them? And that gets into understanding influence. So if I'm trying to reach a group of 100,000 people that are going the wrong direction, who do they trust? How do I influence them? Mm-hmm. And how do I reshape that dialogue so it actually impacts them for the long term? And that's one of the concepts that we call audience architecture. So instead of taking content and pushing it out and then praying that people will get the right story, that's not going to work. We have to say, what is that audience ecosystem now? Who do they care about? And then how do we influence that? And so I think we can do it. We're totally capable of doing it, but it's a mindset shift in how we shape behavior.
Mm-hmm. If we were to try to do an influence campaign, for good, using our powers for good, how would you architect that?
Yeah. So let's say let's say we're in Europe and we're looking at anti-Semitism, and we have 30 groups that we know are doing it. Well, one of them is, first of all, I would say let's all agree to share keywords. Mm-hmm. So when you put out content, you can put out whatever content you want that's unique to your group, but use common keywords so we then impact search. So people then discover more of our content more easily when they go on Google, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is I would do an analysis of who do people actually listen to related to anti-Semitism. So unfortunately, for a lot of people, it's not who we think it might be. It may not be people in government. It may not be reporters. It may be people who are just in think tanks or thought leaders, or they could be rabbis, or they could be, who knows? But the key thing is the market already knows. And so when you do analysis, you see who's already there as a leader. And then it's our job to go work with them to amplify their voice. If you think about it, like, let's say we're in Ukraine. I love Ukraine. I'm actually part Ukrainian. And, when I look at their struggles to become a country, you don't go against the Putin influenced Russian content that goes through the oligarchs' media outlets and hope that you can outdo them. Yeah. You say, who are the emerging voices? Like, who are the people who are saying the right things or fighting for their country? How do we help them build their brand? How do we help them build their audience? How do we turn them into the stars of tomorrow? Versus, hey, I have a great idea. Let's do another campaign and just push it out.
Yeah.
Not going to work. Yeah. We've got to build the ecosystem ourselves. So we're totally capable of doing it, but it's again, it's a mindset shift from the old days of let's just do an advertising campaign. Everything will be great. Like, not really.
Right. We have to be a lot more deliberate about it. Yeah. What do you consider reliable sources of information?
I tend to zero in on it's an interesting two things. I zero in on people. So there's individual people, so if like David Brooks is writing something for the New York Times, I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
But if Holman Jenkins in the Wall Street Journal is writing something, I'm also going to read it. And what I find, and what I tell this all the time is, you have to be, if you really want to learn, you have to be pushing yourself on alternative sources. So if you read the New York Times, read the Wall Street Journal. You know, if you believe that companies are doing amazing things for the environment, also read what Greenpeace has to say. You know, and so if you think that Iran is doing bad things, try to learn about Iran at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, maybe read the Quran or something. You know, but I mean, do something, right? So you start to you build sensitivities in both places, and I found that the best way to learn is to do that. And the reason I started doing that a long time ago is I was working internationally since my early 20s, and so if I'm going to go into Korea for the first time, I'm like, gosh, I don't know anything about Korea. So what do? You read the history of Korea.
Yeah.
And you read about it. Before you know it, you can understand why people have certain customs. And you're inside their heads, and you're like, okay, I know how to align with them. You know, and the same with Japan, the same with China, the same, you know. So we have to do the same thing with sources of information. Like it's like take QAnon. I think that's a terrible group, right? I don't even understand this. It's just terrible. I mean, I'm completely against all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have to like poke your head in it to look at it to say, what are they doing? Like, what are they doing that might be working? And then how could we actually then outsmart them and basically go the other direction? Not any different than if someone's anti-Semitic, what do they do? What are their techniques? Got it. Okay, now we understand how to neutralize or minimize their impact.
How do we identify disinformation? What are the telltale signs?
I'm a big believer in using data science. So one of the things you can see with data science is you can see bot networks moving content like that, because machines work in a very linear way. So if people don't think about it, they go, oh my gosh, you know, bot networks, what are we going to do? When you're looking at them, they're just moving content in a linear way, engaging with it, moving it, and so you can see them. So that we should be able to see them much faster than we do, and that's important. I think the second thing is you can see people's patterns of behaviors. So one of the things that I still want to, we will do, is we're in the process of thinking through what we call a bad actor library, because there aren't that many bad actors in the world. Let's say let's just make up a number and say there's a couple 100,000. That's a tiny data point in today's world. So anyone who has a public face like that, you basically index them and you look at how they act with each other, and then you can start to see how do cells work with each other. What kind of data they usually go out? What's the duration of their disinformation campaign? Which countries tend to start them and which ones don't? You know, and so all these answers are in front of us if we actually index the bad actors in the world. So I do believe we're going to do it ourselves, but I believe that could be something that many groups could do.
Tell us about deep fakes.
Yeah. So the way I like to look at it, Mark, is if Hollywood can do it, bad actors can do it. Right? That's the way I like to start. So when we say like deep fakes, you know, you can make someone's face say something that they didn't say, or you can compress voice, you can change text. Absolutely right. You know, it's becoming almost unlimited what you can do. Yeah. So when I think of deep fakes, I think of that's gotten people's attention, which is great. But if you think of what's next, it's like you can do billions of images. So I could say, okay, this is what I look like today. Let's say I'm not a bad actor, but let's say I was. I now know you're onto me. I'm just going to do another image, another image, another image, another image. And this is why we need to build a bad actor library, because what I will do, because I'm human, is I would probably follow a pattern of likenesses that I would pick. So if you start to see over time, you'd say, oh, there's a pattern. That's Pearson. That's Bob, you know. So so we'll be doing it there, but we'll also be doing it with audio, and you can compress your voice, and you know, people could be downloading this right now and come out with a different version, and you and I would both say we didn't say that, but they have enough of a voice that they're able to compress it, you know, or you know, just things like the thing that scares me the most, and we talk about this when we teach together, is you can change like one thing, you know, use natural language processing, and you could be putting out news every day and just change one little fact every time. So we have to be better at anomaly filters. So if you see something that is not normal, it gets flagged right away.
Yeah.
So, this is ultimately what Facebook and others are trying to do. And I think they're struggling to get to the right place.
Yeah.
But none of it's rocket science. It's all stuff that we can pull up.
Tell us a little bit more about what social media platforms are doing. You just mentioned it, like Facebook and Google and even YouTube. They've been trying to identify and shut down disinformation channels. Tell us a little bit about what they're doing, and should they be doing so?
Yeah, it's well, that's the last part is the interesting part. So,
right.
So I think, in general, I think that they are doing a lot, and I think they're trying really hard. And this is a problem that is going to get worse, not better, because it's easier to do. So it's not really fair to think that they're going to solve it. That's a mistake that we're making. To think that Google and Facebook and Twitter are going to solve this, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
What we have to, I think, look back on is to say, okay, what's really going on here? Our security as a country, let's think of the United States. We're basically outsourcing our security to Mark Zuckerberg and Google and the Twitter folks, and saying, hey guys, good luck. Hope you get it right. That makes no sense. We should be saying, when you identify bad actors, put them in a data lake, allow us to access them. We'll pay you for it, and we can see patterns across channels. Because bad actors know how to smoke Google and Twitter and others. They do it all the time, and they work cross-platform. So if you can't see that information in real time cross-platform, then you're always going to be behind them, and that's an issue. So I think that's the other thing is they will make the case they're not media companies. I don't know how they get away with that, and I can't believe that the folks who question them in Congress can't figure that out. When you build an algorithm, or you build a machine learning training set or an AI tool, it's a human being that's doing it. So human beings are deciding how they weight things, which means that they're injecting bias. So, which is not any different than an editor of a newspaper deciding which articles are on the front page and the back page and which ones never get in. Right. So that's a media company. Now, I don't want them to be regulated by the FCC more.
I would agree.
I don't think anyone wants that if they don't have to be. But that means that they have to start to play ball in a much more proactive way with the public sector.
It really sounds like, given the problem of misinformation and disinformation, its pervasiveness in our information space, the larger companies, government organizations trying to catch up, it really seems as though, and it's obvious to me, that we as individuals have to really put on our filters to really kind of weed out information for ourselves. From your perspective, how do we think critically about information that's presented to us? And what kind of questions do we need to ask as we confront information of any kind?
Yeah, there's two things on there. One is you're getting at, I think, a really important point, which is it's time for the private sector to take this seriously. And I say this when I go out and speak, is, we have what we call corporate social responsibility. And that has been, let's recycle, let's improve the environment, let's do things for our community. Well, this is our community, our country, our communities, our citizens, our children. We're all being impacted by this. And so I think if the public sector starts to treat this like something that they can actually do something about, we actually will start improving education, and we'll get better at this. But in the meantime, I always like to look at like strategic filters. So, I think if people ask themselves simple questions like, do I actually ever look at alternative sources of information, or do I only look at one stream? If that's a check of, no, I don't actually do that, okay, that's a problem. Then the second thing is ask yourself the critical question, who influences me? And I do ask this, by the way, of people, and I'm unfortunately disappointed to see most people not know the answer to that. Right? So then, okay. And then number three, would be, where could you go to learn more? It's like, what's a new channel to open your mind? Right? So really the first and third are related. But if you just get people to say, where do I get information today? And who influences me? You can get people to open their minds. I think that if we make it too complicated and say, here's a 10-point training program and all that, I mean, then everyone's like, and then they don't do it. Right?
It's never going to happen. Right.
Yeah, we just need people to say, it's almost like saying, you weigh too much, you might want to eat less.
Right.
Right. Or, hey, you don't look as good as you could, maybe you should go to the gym. Right. Like these are things like, I could do something. It's like, okay, what are you reading or consuming? Who do you trust?
Right.
Right. Same kind of thing. And I think that helps people in the most simple way.
And it's just so commonsensical what you're saying.
Right. But it's common sense is in short supply usually.
Well, and what I think what I'm finding, especially in this day and age, is that to have a common sense perspective is actually kind of controversial.
Yes, it is. And it's, but that's, that gets back to what I was just saying, because if you are, this doesn't matter which side you're on, for example, in the election we're having.
Right.
If you're only consuming stuff from one side, of course you're going to be more polarized. And I think this is where we're just, I don't know. I think that we have to almost cycle out of that. That's a little bit of fatigue.
Right.
We just have to eventually say we want something better. So I'm not sure I have the answer to that, Mark.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a bit of a sensitive question for you, and it's an important one. Do we live in a free society?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. When you look at like what Freedom Watch looks at, they look at, I think when we talk about freedom, I like the way they approach it, where there's a basket of freedoms, many different types of freedoms, and so net freedoms have decreased consistently over the last, say, decade.
Wow.
Worldwide.
Wow.
So I think the way they count it, and I'm sure people could challenge it, but at 113 of the 190 countries in the United Nations see a net decrease in freedoms over the last decade. So when we say, do we have more or less freedom, I look at it more and say, I look at the world. It's okay, if the world is becoming less free in terms of free speech and ability to not be censored and things like that, that is creating problems that will have a much longer effect on all of us. So we might be as free as the day is long, but if the rest of the world is going the wrong direction, not good.
Right.
And in there, like one of the things that I am, censorship is one of the areas where I'm becoming obsessed with.
Yeah.
There's new areas where I tend to just get really obsessed. And what is hitting me with censorship is that technology is so good now that you can actually censor people without them knowing it, right? Because we think of censorship as like, there's an iron wall, can't get out. There's a Berlin Wall, can't get out. But really it's just decreasing people's reach. It's deleting people's accounts quietly. There's so many ways that you can create mischief now with censorship. So that's the concern I see, is that freedom is decreasing net-wise worldwide. Given
all that is happening now, what do you see for our future? How do you see all of the current trends and things like that? How is that going to play out? And is there a way to course correct?
There is, and this is where I get very optimistic. So, there's very few bad actors in the world when we really look at it. There's 7.7 billion of us. And so if we decide to do something, we can have a great outcome. And so I think, if I think of like governments in general, governments, the more that they learn how to work with each other and not worry about their divisions or departments, but just think of how do I actually impact this battling disinformation, that works. The quicker that the private sector realizes is that this is now an issue that affects everything. Like I said, country, children, communities, all that. We start to make an improvement there. And if we do that, we have the full capability of combating disinfo. The other thing I think is we have to become less adversarial with our own companies. And so, Google is an amazing company. Twitter serves a purpose. Let's have a discussion with them about how to solve problems rather than talk at them.
Right.
Right. And so I think if we decide to do it and do it constructively, we'll make a great impact.
You're currently working with a major department of the US government. What kind of advice are you giving them in terms of countering and undermining disinformation?
Well, the main thing, like, there's a couple places that I give my time in.
Hmm.
With the Global Engagement Center, one of the things I really like is there's something called disinfocloud.com. So anyone listening to this could go there and you can see all the technologies that have been tested that are related to combating disinfo. I think that's extremely valuable because part of what we need to do is actually allow the private sector and other countries to see what's working
Yeah.
or not working and also add to it. So I think getting private sector know-how
Hmm.
in the hands of the public sector is one of the best things we can do. I always say this, I mean, there's so many smart people in the public sector. Like we don't have an issue of intelligence. We have an issue of access to the latest innovation that we can then apply.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is, I guess you would call it tech transfer.
Is there anything that we as individuals can do to counter or undermine the impact of disinformation or misinformation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think at the fundamental level, we all engage in bias. This is actually something I've written about before. So, because you can seem overwhelming and you say, well, I can't go against Russia, I'm just an individual.
Right.
It's like, no, you can be nice to people on Facebook. You can actually think twice about what you just said in a comment on Twitter. You can actually be a lot of times people are really great people in person. And then you put them in a digital environment, for some reason this other side of it comes off. Turn it off, right? And when you see your friends doing it, ask them to stop.
Right.
So imagine if we all just did that. Would we decrease the volume?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So we really all can do something.
So I want to ask some general advice and lessons learned questions. If you could share one secret of your success, what would that be?
Yeah, it's I've had the opportunity to work closely with several CEOs, and Dan Vasella, who was the CEO of Novartis, and Michael Dell, which we know runs Dell Technologies.
Right.
And when you are around people like that who are just brilliant, you say, okay, what is it that they do well? Mark Benioff is another one, Salesforce.com. And I find that they're incremental innovators. And really Steve Jobs was an incremental innovator when you really break it apart. Every single interaction they have, they think, how do I make something better? And if something isn't working, okay, how do I stop doing it as fast as possible and then go on to the next thing? So it's not emotional. It's just, how do you do it? Now I translate that into my life of every media model, everything we do in digital media is old school. How do you improve it? What's next?
Yeah.
And if you keep thinking like that every day, you make a lot of progress. But it's like all the time. That's what the most innovative people do. So that's what I've learned is it's not a aha breakthrough and then you're done.
Right.
It's actually the grind of always trying to be better.
What's the greatest lesson you've learned either in life or in business?
I would say I've learned early in my career what we do matters and has the potential to save lives in many cases. And so when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I got to talk with people, unfortunately dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, colorectal cancer, and they were the most hopeful people. Wow. Who were really hoping that we would come out with a treatment quicker that might impact, maybe not them, because they knew that they were going to die, but maybe the next group of people. And that kind of urgency to say, if we do the right things, we actually make society better, or can. Yeah. That's I think the biggest thing. And I think when you're in the public sector, you're in the public sector for a reason. Because you want to give back and make society better. Right. You want to make the world better. I think when you're in industries like that, you like pharmaceuticals or healthcare, you're in there because you want to make things better. And when people don't have that urgency, that's when I'm concerned. Right? Because we do have that ability to improve the world. And we also can't wait till tomorrow. It's stuff it's like, what can we do today? And I think if you have that kind of urgency, then that's a good thing.
That's awesome. I love what you just said. If you do the right things, we make society better.
Right. Right. Every day.
It's just every day, every day. And don't wait to do the right thing.
No, there's nothing like I'm going to do it when I retire, or, it's like, no, it's like, what are you going to do today?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
If you could offer one piece of advice to the world, what would it be?
The piece of advice I would have would be, we're all the same. We are, if you look at DNA, humans are humans. We may look different to each other, but we're all the same.
Yeah.
And if we can learn how to protect each other and help each other, we can actually make a big difference. And the example I give is related to what we're talking about today, Mark, is most of the world is very young.
Yeah.
And our habits and memories get drilled into our brains for the rest of our lives between like birth and age 25. So imagine if we just all figured out, like, how do we help the youth in the world, wherever they are, have the best experience possible so they become the best citizens of tomorrow?
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
But that means, if you're helping a kid on a Saturday learn math, you're doing something great. If you're doing something in the community, you're doing something great. Like it's all these little things that add up. But if we're all doing it, we're all trying to do it, it's no problem. But as you know, we don't, because we make excuses. We say, oh, I can't do it, I'm busy, we'll do that next time. But the urgency is there for that. And I think that would be cool.
What do you want most for your life?
I always look at it in terms of the people that I've impacted. Whether it's actually working in industry, building teams, or building firms. Mm-hmm. I actually don't know that I care that much about myself. We have our time and we go. It's how many lives did I impact?
Yeah.
And if I can think that I keep going in that direction, then I'm happy. Yeah. But if it ever just became about me, I would be sad. Because we're just one person, right? We can impact so many other folks. So that's it. And it's really, I've thought about that a lot over the decades of been alive, and it's not more complicated than that. Right. It's not like, gosh, if I could only get that boat, Right. It's not about that at all. It's about impacting other people's lives.
Well, I can definitely say you've impacted my life in the time that I've known you in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Mark.
To the degree that I said, I want to talk with Bob more and really pick his brain. And I think that maybe we could do something together.
Right.
We can have some impact and influence together.
Here we are.
Yeah. At this point, I want to open it up for you to share any final thoughts with us. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you think would be really helpful for us to know?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned there's a lot of things, but I'll just do a couple. One is, you mentioned the book Crafti Persuasion at the beginning, that I co-wrote with Kip Knight and Ed Tazia. And it was really a reflection of many other professors who teach in government over the years, and we kind of collapsed all of our thinking into one. The ability to tell our story powerfully matters. Yeah. So as we think of this topic, it's not about just putting stuff out. It's about really, like I said, thinking about the audience, but it's also thinking about what is that narrative that's going to align with the audience. Mm-hmm. So if everyone who's in the business of sharing our country's story or our company's story, things like that, we do a lot better. Yeah. I think the other thing is everyone needs to have analytics in their life. Mm-hmm. That's my view, because it's so quantitative out there with watching how humans interact in any way worldwide, that the more quantitative we get, the better qualitatively we can be. So if you think about it, like, let's say you and I were creative directors at an advertising agency. If we have all this analytics, we're going to build better campaigns, But if we're actually telling the story of America somewhere and we have better analytics, we're going to align with the audience we're trying to reach in Kazakhstan, right? Like, we're going to it comes together. So that's another. And then I think being a continual learning is the last point I'd like to make. And when I talk to groups in private industry, one of the things I say is, you never stop being a student. And so then I ask, what are you reading to stretch yourself? And some people have answers, but many, they're reading the same books that everyone else is reading. Yeah. And so what I'll say to them is, why don't you read a book on Chernobyl, or read a book on the history of China, or
Yeah.
read a book on artificial intelligence, and like get out of your comfort zone
Yeah.
and stretch yourself.
Great.
Instead of reading every single business book that comes out, and then you say the exact words that everyone else says.
Right.
Like that herding behavior doesn't make us smarter.
Where can people find you and connect with you online?
Most of the posts I do, I put on LinkedIn. So people are welcome to go in there, and it's just my name, Bob Pearson. So that's easy. And then on Twitter, it's at Bob Pearson 1845. And the 1845, just so you know, is that's when Texas joined the United States. So yeah, couldn't resist from putting that on there. Right.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true Texan. That's
right. Yeah, and Mark, I mentioned to you I was going to try to work this in here, but
Please.
In the spirit of what we were talking about with combating disinfo, the piece of artwork behind me is actually of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And it's from a Jordanian, an emerging female artist in Jordan, Dalia Ali. And we bought it from a couple that's English and Arabic,
yeah.
That are in the Jewish quarter. So there were just so many things in there. We were like, this is what it's about, right?
Gorgeous.
So, yeah.
The picture is gorgeous, and the story around it is even better, actually.
Right.
That's beautiful. Bob, you completely, as always, far exceeded my expectations. Thank you so much for taking the time with me. Brilliant insights and wisdom. And I can't wait to share this with everybody. And I have a feeling that we're going to be talking more in the future. So
no, that's great. And Mark, thank you for doing this series. I think it's important that we take the time to talk about things like this. It's great that you're doing this on a regular basis.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.